The stadium pulsed like a living creature. 72,000 voices collided in a thunderous roar, echoing off the steel and concrete bowl of Wembley like waves crashing against cliffs. Lights burned from towers like artificial suns, casting long shadows across a sea of faces painted with sweat, anticipation, and glitter. Flags waved, fists pumped. The smell of beer, cigarette smoke, and summer rain mixed into a haze that hung above the crowd. And at the very center of it all, one man in white. Freddie Mercury strutted across the stage in his iconic tank top and jeans, microphone half-stand in hand like a scepter. The cameras magnified his presence onto colossal screens, but even without them he was larger than life. He leaned forward, teasing the crowd, letting them scream until their throats broke. His eyes glittered beneath the stage lights, a mischievous monarch surveying his empire. The band launched into radio. G.A. Roger Taylor pounded the drums with military precision. Brian May's guitar shimmered through the night, and John Deacon's bass rumbled beneath it all like a heartbeat. The crowd clapped in perfect unison, that famous double clap echoing across Wembley like the very pulse of rock and roll. And then, silence. It didn't fade. It didn't glitch. It didn't distort. It died. One moment the music surged like a tidal wave. The next it was gone, cut clean out of existence. The speakers, towers of black steel and mesh that had been blasting sound to every corner of Wembley, fell mute. The guitars, the drums, the vocals, everything stopped. For a half second, the crowd didn't notice. Their own voices filled the air. They were used to being deafened by themselves, used to their collective roar drowning out even the band. But then seconds ticked by. The claps fell out of rhythm. Confusion spread like a ripple. Heads turned. Faces frowned. The tidal wave of sound collapsed into scattered shouts and mutters. What happened? Did they cut it? Power outage? Up on stage, the band froze. Brian May glanced sharply at his amp, plucking furiously, but no sound emerged. Roger Taylor lifted his sticks helplessly, his cymbals ringing in useless silence. John Deacon lowered his bass, staring at the engineers at stage left. Roadies sprinted like panicked ants, tracing wires, waving frantic signals at the sound booth. And at the center, Freddie Mercury stood completely still, the microphone in his hand, dead, his voice stolen, his empire sound gone. For a brief moment, his mask slipped, his jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, his chest rose and fell as if he'd been punched. Every performer's nightmare had just descended upon him. The machine that carried his music to 72,000 people had betrayed him. The silence was deafening. The roar of the crowd turned uneasy. Cheers became murmurs. Some laughed nervously. Others booed. A ripple of frustration swelled across the stadium like a storm cloud building. "Fix it," someone shouted from the floor. "Come on," another yelled. The band huddled together near the drum kit. Brian leaned in, shouting over the sea of restless voices. "What the hell do we do?" Freddie didn't move. His hand gripped the microphone stand tighter. His eyes weren't on the band, nor the sound booth, nor the technicians running wild. His eyes were on the audience, on 72,000 faces. Every second stretched like an eternity. 10, 15, 30. The spell of the concert, that fragile suspension of disbelief where performer and audience become one, was breaking. Wembley was on the verge of slipping from magic to chaos. But Freddie Mercury wasn't just a singer. He wasn't just a performer. He was a commander of moments. Slowly, he walked forward, each step deliberate, boots striking the stage like drum beats. He came to the very edge of the platform. So close he could see the whites of the eyes in the first rows. So close the heat of the crowd rolled over him like a furnace. He looked out at the mass of humanity before him, the confusion, the frustration, the expectation. And then he raised his hands high. The stadium froze. Without a microphone, without amplifiers, without a single watt of power, Freddie Mercury opened his mouth and shouted into the night, "I-O!" At first, only those closest heard. The sound barely carried past the barricades. But the front rows, stunned and thrilled, screamed back, "I-O!" Freddie grinned. The mask fully gone now, replaced with something rawer, fiercer. He thrust the microphone stand like a spear toward the heavens and bellowed again, louder. Ayo! This time it spread further. A wave, a chorus, 50 rows deep, 100, 1,000. I-oh! The sound wasn't polished. It wasn't amplified. It was chaotic, ragged, human, but it was loud. Freddie's eyes sparkled. He paced the stage, conducting with his free hand, his voice straining against the impossible wall of silence and winning. The band watched in disbelief. Technicians froze mid-sprint, cables dangling in their hands. The sound crew stood slack-jawed at the booth. Even the camera operators forgot to move their rigs. The impossible was happening. 72,000 people were roaring back, louder than any sound system on Earth. The silence hadn't killed the concert. It had reborn it. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. The lights were still blinding. The cameras still rolled. The fans still packed into every corner of Wembley like waves against the walls of a fortress. But the music was gone. The silence after Freddie's first daring I.O. left a void so massive it felt physical, pressing down on everyone in the stadium. The crowd's voices filled some of it, but it was fractured, restless. A million questions spilled into the air. Was this a technical glitch? A sabotage? Would the concert even continue? Backstage, chaos reigned. Technicians tore through racks of cables like surgeons in crisis, sweat dripping onto their clipboards as they barked at each other. Channel 3 is dead. No, it's the main feed. Check the amps, check the amps. The soundboard operator slammed his fist on the console, praying for any flicker of green lights to return. Brian May leaned down, shouting over the din of the restless audience. What's happening? How long is this going to take? A roadie ran past him, headset askew, shouting, could be minutes, could be the whole night. Power surge burned through half the stack. Minutes. Whole night. The words thudded in Brian's chest. This wasn't some pub gig where an acoustic guitar could carry a room. This was Wembley. This was Queen at their peak. A spectacle years in the making. Tickets had sold out in hours. Millions around the world would hear about this. And there was Freddie, standing at the edge of the stage, still motionless except for his breathing. Brian reached him, gripping his arm. Freddie, wait it out. Let them fix it. We can restart when the system's back. Freddie turned his head slowly, eyes locked not on Brian, but on the endless sea of faces in front of them. Wait out, he said, his voice sharp, dangerous. Darling, do you hear them? They won't wait. Roger Taylor banged his sticks against a snare in frustration. The sound, small and amplified, barely carried past the first rows. He dropped the sticks, ran his hands through his hair, and muttered, Bloody hell, this is a disaster. John Deacon stayed quiet, bass still slung over his shoulder, staring at the sound booth. His silence wasn't calm. It was the silence of a man bracing for a blow. Freddie paced slowly, his boots tapping the stage like a clock counting down. Inside, though, he was a storm. He'd been here before, moments where things threatened to collapse, moments where the weight of expectation threatened to crush him. But never like this, not in front of this many. It was Wembley, his cathedral, his battlefield, his judgment day. He could feel the pressure like a hand closing around his throat. He'd conquered arenas, conquered Live Aid, conquered America. But standing there with dead microphones, dead speakers, and 72,000 people growing impatient by the second, he felt naked, exposed. The voice in his head whispered, This is it. This is the night you fail. This is the night the magic ends. He clenched his fists, nails biting into his palms. The voice in his head had haunted him before every major performance. The doubt, the terror of being ordinary when the world demanded extraordinary. Tonight, that voice had more ammunition than ever. From the crowd came a low rumble of boos. Not many, yet but enough to sting. Enough to remind him that the line between legend and humiliation was razor thin. He caught the face of a boy in the front row, no older than 12, perched on his father's shoulders, holding a homemade sign, Freddie lives forever. The boy's eyes were wide, desperate, pleading. That's when something shifted inside him. He turned back to his bandmates, his grin returning. Not the carefree grin of a man who had everything under control, but the dangerous grin of a man ready to gamble everything. "No," he said softly, shaking his head. "We're not waiting. We're not stopping. We don't need them." Brian frowned. "Freddie, without sound." "Without sound." Freddie cut in, stepping close. "I am sound." He spun back to the crowd. The technicians were still fumbling, the audience still restless. But Freddie Mercury's presence pulled focus like gravity itself. He raised one hand high, fingers splayed like a preacher about to summon fire from heaven. And for a moment, even in the chaos, silence fell again. The audience was confused. Why wasn't he waiting? Why wasn't he walking off? Why wasn't the great Freddie Mercury furious, screaming at the crew? Instead, he looked out at them, lips curled into a defiant smirk, as if to say, "If the machines betray me, I'll turn you into the machine." The band members exchanged glances. Roger wiped his face with a towel, muttering, "He's bloody mad." John shrugged, silent, resigned to follow wherever Freddie led. Brian sighed, tightened his strap on the red special, and whispered, "Well, if anyone can pull this off." Backstage, the crew worked desperately, but many of them had stopped glancing at the equipment. Their eyes were fixed on the stage, on Freddie, on the impossible possibility that he might actually turn this disaster into a triumph. And then the moment stretched. The crowd sensed something was about to happen. They hushed, leaned forward, thousands of breaths caught in the same second. Freddie's chest rose as he inhaled, his jaw set. His eyes gleamed with that dangerous spark the world knew too well. Without the comfort of speakers, without the armor of amplification, Freddie Mercury, the man, not the legend, prepared to go to war with 72,000 voices. The silence at Wembley wasn't just quiet. It was suffocating. 72,000 people pressed into their seats, shifting, murmuring, waiting for anyone, to take control. A few voices jeered. Others shouted instructions the band couldn't hear. The technicians backstage sweated over tangled wires. But the stage was still mute, all except for one man. Freddie Mercury stood at the very lip of the stage, arms raised as if summoning thunder from the clouds. He wasn't smiling now. His face was carved with intensity, eyes burning with the kind of fury that could bend reality. He looked like a man who refused to accept defeat, not from broken machines, not from fate, not from anything. He dropped his arm, opened his mouth, and roared, "I-O!" The sound wasn't polished. It wasn't amplified. It was raw, human, strained against the immensity of Wembley. But the front rows heard it, startled. They echoed back instinctively, voices sharp and high against the still air. "I-O!" Freddie grinned, the grin of a lion tasting blood. He stomped once, twice, and bellowed again, louder this time, his chest straining. "Ay-O!" It rolled further, the waves spreading like ripples from a stone cast in a lake. First a few thousand, then tens of thousands. The echo thundered back, "I-O!" And suddenly the silence wasn't silence anymore. It was call and response, a ritual as old as music itself. Freddie's eyes lit with wild delight. He paced the stage, pointing to the left stands. "A-O! A-Y-O-H!" came the roar. He swung to the right, stabbing the mic stand toward the sky like a conductor's baton. "I-Y-O! A-Y-Y-O-H-H-H!" The stadium shook, not with drums, not with amps, with voices, human voices, 72,000 strong, rising in perfect defiance of silence. Brian May froze mid-stage, his red special still silent against his chest. He looked out into the sea of people answering Freddie and whispered to himself, "Bloody hell, he's doing it." Roger Taylor leaned forward on his drum kit, laughing in disbelief. "He's turned them into the bloody sound system." Even the crew at the sound booth stopped, fumbling for a moment. They looked out at the impossible spectacle unfolding. Freddie Mercury commanding a crowd larger than some cities with nothing but his lungs. The audience was no longer restless. They were ecstatic. Fans clapped, stomped, screamed. The boy in the front row, still on his father's shoulders, cupped his hands around his mouth and screamed AYOH, so loud his voice cracked. Entire sections swayed in rhythm, waving their arms, turning chaos into communion. Freddie wasn't just leading them. He was possessing them. La-dee-dee-H, he cried, throwing his head back, voice straining upward. L-A-D-H, the crowd bellowed. D-D-H-H. Back and forth, like waves crashing against cliffs, the sound surged, each volley louder than the last, each call pulling deeper from the crowd's lungs, each response lifting Freddie higher, until he wasn't just a man on stage. He was the very center of a living, breathing storm. And then, without warning, Freddie stopped. The stadium gasped. He lifted his fist. Silence again, except this time it wasn't uneasy. It was electric. Every soul in Wembley leaned forward, waiting, craving his next move. Freddie lowered his voice, almost a whisper, a playful grin tugging at his lips. The audience followed, soft at first, then swelling into a thunderclap. E-Y-O-H. Freddie laughed, tossing his head back. He had them. Completely. Utterly. Not through wires or machines, but through something older, deeper connection. Brian couldn't help it anymore. He began to strum. Softly at first, the acoustic sound barely audible, but enough for those closest to catch. Roger tapped his sticks against the rims, joining in. John plucked his bass strings unamplified. The vibrations felt more than heard. And just like that, Queen was playing a silent set, backed not by technology, but by 72,000 voices, singing every word. The first chords of We Will Rock You rippled from Brian's guitar, faint but recognizable. Freddie didn't need a microphone. He didn't even need to sing. He stamped his boots on the stage, and the entire stadium followed. Boom, boom, clap. The sound was primal, overwhelming. A living drumbeat powered by human feet. Freddie twirled his mic stand like a saber, strutting across the stage. He shouted, unamplified, We will rock you. The response was volcanic. We will rock you. The stand shook under the force of 72,000 stomps. Dust rose from the ground. Even the steel girders of Wembley seemed to hum with the rhythm. Cameras panned wildly, tried to capture what no broadcast could truly hold. The moment when an arena full of strangers became one instrument in Freddie Mercury's hands. He was no longer just frontman. He was prophet, conductor, king. Backstage, a technician shouted, "We've got partial power back." But the head engineer, eyes wide at the spectacle on stage, grabbed his arm. "Not yet." Let him finish. Freddie, drenched in sweat, chest heaving, lifted his hands high once more. He let the crowd roar wash over him, louder than any speaker could have made it. The impossible had happened. The sound system had shut down, and Freddie Mercury had turned the crowd itself into the greatest amplifier on earth. The noise had turned into something unearthly. Not feedback, not distortion, not the thrum of amplifiers. It was human, raw, a wall of 72,000 voices, shaking Wembley Stadium like thunder. Freddie Mercury stood center stage, arms spread wide like a conductor at the helm of an orchestra the size of a city. Sweat gleamed across his chest, his white tank top clinging as though it had been painted on. His chest heaved, but his grin was feral. He had done it. Turned silence into a storm. Behind him, Brian May strummed his red special with delicate precision. The guitar had no amplification, but those near the front could hear faint chords, ghostly threads weaving into the roar of the crowd. Roger Taylor leaned forward, tapping his sticks against the rims of his drums, sending out small percussive signals that rippled like sparks in dry grass. John Deacon plucked quietly, the bass line more vibration than sound, but still grounding them. It wasn't music in the traditional sense. It was communion. Freddie stepped forward, balancing the mic stand across his shoulders like a cross, his voice tearing from his throat unamplified. "Buddy, you're a boy. Make a big noise." The rest he didn't need to sing. The audience exploded, carrying the words like a tidal wave. Playing in the street gonna be a big man someday. Freddie smirked. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't going to let the sound system steal the moment back. Not yet. This was theirs now. A Queen show reborn as a campfire sing along the sides of Wembley itself. Backstage, the engineers were panicked. "We got the amps hot again," one shouted, waving a readout. Sparks have been doused, power rerouted, feeds humming back to life. We can bring the system up. The head engineer shook his head slowly, eyes fixed on the stage. Not yet. Don't you see? He doesn't want it back. Because Freddie Mercury wasn't just salvaging the show. He was making history. We will rock you. The stomp clap shook the ground. Beer cups rattled against the concrete. 72,000 feet slammed in time, dust rising like smoke. It was louder than the PA had ever been, louder than electricity itself. Brian glanced at Roger, then at John. They all shared the same look, disbelief mixed with awe. They had played thousands of shows together, conquered stages across the world, but never had they seen anything like this. Freddie wasn't performing for the crowd anymore. He was performing with them. He pointed suddenly toward the east stands. "You lot!" he shouted, unamplified. He jabbed the mic stand like a spear. "Your turn!" And 72,000 heads swung to the right, watching as the east stands detonated in a synchronized roar. "We are the champions." He swung to the west. "And you?" The west stands answered, louder still, "We are the champions." He cupped his hand to his ear, feigning mock seriousness, teasing them. "Louder, darling, louder! They can't hear you in bloody Manchester." The crowd erupted again, drowning the silence in a symphony of human sound. And then something remarkable happened. People would come as strangers, different ages, different lives, different corners of the world, suddenly moved as one. The stomps, the claps, the voices all aligned. Friends gripped each other's shoulders. Fathers hoisted children higher. Strangers embraced, laughing and crying, carried by the tidal force of the moment. Freddie spun like a whirlwind, striking pose after pose, milking the rhythm like a matador with a raging bull. Every flick of his wrist, every twist of his hips sent the audience into fresh delirium. He was building something bigger than a concert now. He was building a legend. Backstage, a young roadie who had joined the crew only weeks earlier whispered to no one in particular, "I'll tell my grandkids about this." On stage, Brian May stepped forward, playing the opening riff of We Are the Champions. His guitar, faint but recognizable, cut through the air. Freddie lifted his hand in a dramatic flourish, as if to say, "Yes, this is how we finish it." The crowd didn't hesitate. They roared every word. The verses trembled, imperfect but beautiful, tens of thousands of voices cracking under the weight of emotion. Freddie didn't try to overpower them. He let them sing for him. He paced, pointing to sections, raising his hands high when he wanted more volume, dropping low to whisper when he wanted them hushed. And when the chorus hit, Wembley shook like the ground itself was singing. "We are the champions, my friends." It wasn't just a song anymore. It was an oath. Freddie leaned against his mic stand, lips curled into a sly smile. He let them sing, let them give everything, and then, on the very last word, he joined in, voice cutting through like a blade. "No time for losers, 'cause we are the champions." He paused, pointed to the entire stadium, sweat dripping down his arm, and mouthed the final line with them. "Of the world." The explosion of sound nearly lifted the roof from Wembley. People wept openly. Fans clutched at each other, unable to believe they were witnessing this once-in-a-lifetime collision of disaster and glory. The sound crew's green lights blinked steady. Power was back. The system could roar again at any moment, but Freddie held up his hand and mouthed toward the technicians. Not yet. He wasn't done. He wanted the night to be burned into history not because of what their machines delivered, but because of what human beings, stripped of every layer of artifice, could create together. He turned to Brian, to Roger, to John, his chest still heaving. For a moment, they all just looked at each other, wordless. This wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It was madness, and it was beautiful. Brian later admitted in interviews. In that moment, it was like Freddie plugged directly into the soul of the stadium. He didn't just hold them together. He became them. The final chorus of We Are the Champions lingered in the air like smoke after fireworks. 72,000 voices, still ringing, breathless, unified. For a heartbeat, there was silence again, Not the broken, panicked silence from earlier, but something sacred. A silence heavy with awe. Freddie Mercury stood at the center of the stage, chest heaving, sweat dripping, Mike's stand resting against his shoulder like a soldier's banner. His eyes scanned the crowd, faces lit with tears, mouths still open from screaming, hands raised like worshippers in a cathedral. He had bent Wembley to his will without electricity, without amplification, without anything but himself and their faith in him. And then, like a ghost returning, the speakers crackled. A low hum buzzed across the stage monitors. Red and green lights blinked back to life on the amplifiers. The technicians gave frantic thumbs-ups from the booth. The system was alive again. Roger Taylor banged his sticks against the snare experimentally. This time, the crack of wood and steel exploded through the speakers like a cannon shot. Brian May strummed his guitar, and the Red Special roared with the voice of thunder once more. John Deacon's bass growled deep, rattling the chests of those pressed against the barricades. The crowd cheered wildly, but Freddie wasn't smiling. He raised one hand in a mock command, as if scolding the technology for daring to come back. He tapped the mic with one finger, tilted his head, and with a smirk set into it. Well, welcome back, darling. Laughter rippled to the crowd, breaking into applause. He let them savor for a moment, then whipped around to his bandmates. His grin sharpened. Now he hissed through clenched teeth, eyes gleaming. Let's show them what power really sounds like. Roger counted in with a violent crash of drums. Brian's guitar ignited into the opening riff of Tie Your Mother Down. The full force of Queen, unshackled, tore through the speakers like a hurricane released from a cage. The shift was seismic. One moment, the crowd had been a choir. Now they were a tidal wave being driven by electricity and fire. The stage lights blazed, lasers shot across the night sky, smoke cannons burst, and Freddie, reinvigorated, unstoppable, prowled the stage with the swagger of a general returning to battle. The stadium was chaos, but it was joyful chaos. People leapt onto shoulders, arms flailing, voices hoarse but still screaming. Fans in the back, who moments before had been straining to hear faint echoes, now felt the music slam into them like a physical force. Wembley wasn't just vibrating with sound, it was alive. But there was a difference now. The crowd wasn't simply watching a performance anymore. They had been the performance. They had saved it, and Freddie knew it. Between songs, he let them know. He leaned against the piano, breathing hard, eyes softening for a rare moment. "You beautiful lot," he panted, wiping his brow with a towel. "You kept the music alive tonight. Without you, there'd be no show." The crowd erupted, but Freddie silenced them with a raised finger. His voice dropped lower, almost tender. "But now, darlings, now you get the real thing." And with that, he slammed into the keys, and Bohemian Rhapsody unfurled like a spell. The operatic section, thunderous again, carried by both the speakers and the tens of thousands who knew every word. Freddie leaned back on the mic at times, letting the audience scream entire verses, only to swoop back in with operatic flourishes that sent shivers down spines. The rock section hit harder than ever. Brian's guitar screaming, Roger's drums detonating, John's bass shaking bones. By the final lines, "Nothing really matters," Freddie sang with a poignancy sharpened by what had just unfolded. The crowd swayed, lighters flickering like stars in the darkness. And then came the finale. The unmistakable stomp stomp clap thundered into life. This time amplified to the full system, but still powered by 72,000 stomping feet. "We Will Rock You" wasn't just a song anymore. It was an exorcism, a victory lap, a reminder of what they had endured together. Freddie straddled the stage like a titan, conducting every clap, every stomp, every scream. His eyes flashed as if daring the universe itself to ever silence him again. Finally, We Are the Champions returned, not stripped down this time, but soaring. The stadium lights bathed the crowd in gold. The band poured everything into the music, and Freddie sang like his very soul was on fire. "We are the champions, my friends." This time, it was both a song and a declaration. They had fought through silence, through fear, through chaos, and emerged victorious. Freddie's voice climbed higher, defiant, triumphant. "No time for losers," he belted, fist raised. The entire stadium screamed the last line with him, louder than the speakers themselves. 'Cause we are the champions of the world. The sound that followed wasn't applause. It was detonation. A roar so powerful, the very girders of Wembley seemed to vibrate with it. People wept openly. Strangers embraced. Fans knew instinctively they had witnessed not just a concert, but a moment in history. Freddie collapsed to his knees at the front of the stage, head bowed, microphone still clutched in his fist. The band struck their final chords, then let them fade, replaced by the earthquake of human voices. Slowly, Freddie lifted his head, and his eyes glittered with sweat and something else, gratitude. He whispered into the mic, voice trembling but clear. The sound may have gone out, darling, but the music never did. The crowd erupted once more, but he didn't linger. He stood, bowed low, and walked off into the darkness of the wings, leaving behind a stadium forever changed. Epilogue, the legend. In the days that followed, newspapers called it the night Queen rewrote Stadium Rock. Critics who once questioned the band's theatricality now admitted that no other frontman in history could have turned disaster into transcendence. Brian May told reporters, Freddie didn't just save the show. He gave people the greatest night of their lives. Roger Taylor simply said, it was chaos. It was terrifying. And it was beautiful. For the fans who were there, the story became myth. No bootleg, no photograph, no recording could capture it. The true memory lived only in the hearts of those who sang into the void and found Freddie Mercury staring back at them, defiant, commanding, human, and immortal all at once. That night at Wembley, a power outage became power incarnate. Not from wires, not from machines, from people, from Freddie. And that is why, decades later, when fans speak of Queen's greatest moments, they always come back to the night the sound shut off completely, and Freddie Mercury turned silence into legend. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.